Oxford University Press, Higher Education Webinars. And now, Oxford is proud to present Music Theory, an Integrated Approach, led by Steve Laitz.
Hello, my name is Steve Laitz, and I'm the author of The Complete Musician, published by Oxford University Press. As professor of music theory at the Eastman School since 1989, I've been focusing on pedagogy, and I'd like to take a little bit of time to talk to you about music theory and its teaching, because I think it's a difficult enterprise. There's some solutions and some examples that I'd like to present, and I certainly hope that they'll be helpful to you. The book was an outgrowth of what I perceived to be serious problems in teaching music theory at the college level. The main problem is that it's not relevant to performers. Students would enter the music theory classroom and leave outside the door all their curiosity, instincts, and skills, only to pick them back up as they left the room when the class was over. I found that very troubling. The book's underlying philosophy is predicated on, number one, addressing the issues of relevance, number two, maintaining the highest possible musical standards, and number three, presenting the most current pedagogy. I believe that students are less prepared when they enter college than ever, not only generally, as in reading and writing, but also specifically in their musical skills, their reading, their understanding of the repertoire, and especially their oral skills. Remediation is often necessary, and schools now have entire programs devoted to that topic, but remediation is dull and lifeless, forces us to postpone getting to the interesting stuff like that analysis of the Brahms Third Symphony. There are many reasons why students have weak skills. One is that they're more busy, less time to devote to developing these skills through junior high and in high school. A second reason is that the fact that singers and single line players, the bassoonist, the flutist, etc., have not had any piano background. In the past, there was a piano in most folks' living rooms. These days, it's a rarity. Students come to college, very few of them are able to get around on the keyboard, and of course harmony is predicated on understanding the keyboard. Or number three, worse yet, they've lost faith in what it is that might appear to be arcane now, but will be useful to them in the future. First, let's call music theory music practice, because music theory implies something that's abstract, dead, and pretty useless. However, practice implies something alive, practical, useful, and active. If we invoke the idea of active teaching, we can imbue our courses with relevance very easily. For example, we can present and assess all topics in a musical context using the literature. Number two, we should aim for students' contributions. If they are actively involved in the class, they will rise to the challenge and the concepts will stick. And number three, we all remember what Confucius wrote. I hear, I forget. I see, I remember. I do, I understand. There are several ways to accomplish teaching musical practice, all of which run like a thread throughout The Complete Musician. Number one, theory and analysis must present music as a process and not as a series of objects. This is the way that actually composers thought about it. The days of freezing music into a series of vertical sonorities and then attaching Roman numerals one by one are hopefully gone, because they tell you nothing really about the flow of the music. This is because harmony and melody are inextricably connected. In fact, harmony emerges from the combination of melodic lines. Such an approach will certainly be attractive to singers and single-line players. Some folks call this a linear approach versus the so-called vertical approach, but it's much more than this. Interpreting chords based on their context and their function is certainly the way to get into the performer's interpretation of music. For example, Mozart in his D minor Fantasy began with a simple chord progression of 1, moving to 5-4-3, 5-6-5, and back to 1. If we allow this to suffice as an analysis, we are doing a grave disservice to what Mozart has actually set up. Let me play the example for you and I'll show you what I mean. I would say that this is not a phrase. Rather, I think it's a melodic motion created simply by a double neighbor in the bass. A purely melodic motion that is mirrored by the soprano. And together, creating very nice contrary motion counterpoint. What's most important about this double neighbor that extends over 4 bars is actually that the tune that Mozart starts off with presents those very pitches. So what we've done is found out that Mozart is actually creating a musical premise and that he's working this out over 4 bars. By missing that, we're missing really the act of composition and an important feature of the music itself. Let's look at another example, this time by Brahms from one of his Intermezzi. It's more complicated, but it proves the point very clearly that if we assess and evaluate music only through Roman numerals, we really are barking up the wrong tree. Let me play the example. This complicated series of diminished 7th chords, resolving to 6/4 chords, would be a nightmare for students to analyze. However, if we simply look at the lines that Brahms writes, we learn exactly what the trick is. The upper line begins with a neighboring figure, followed by a passing figure. And if we look at the bass line, that very same passing figure begins, followed by the neighbor. Together, making sort of a very nice part exchange, which we call double or invertible counterpoint. Let me play it again and see if you can hear that. The piece all of a sudden takes on a life of its own, one that's directed by melody and not by harmony. In fact, there's a wonderful story about Brahms writing his friend Clara Wieck and the great violinist Joachim, telling them, hey, why don't we start this counterpoint club? We'll focus on invertible counterpoint. They, of course, took him up on it, and this went back and forth in the mail all over Europe as they traveled. The important point is that invertible and double counterpoint is no mere Baroque practice. It extends all the way through Brahms. Number 2, we must integrate our approach and make sure that it's driven always by music in the context. That is to say, if we introduce the Neapolitan chord, I think the worst thing you can do is to tell the students that it's a chord that's predicated on a flat 2 Roman numeral and that it's built of a major triad. You'll lose the students immediately. Instead, simply introduce the chord which they've heard probably for 15 years in a musical context. This is a passage from Schubert's Die schöne Müllerin, in which the Neapolitan is featured. And of course it stands out really wonderfully because of the flat 2 being in the soprano. We can compare this with the diatonic form. Completely different effect. And of course, the use of flat 2 aligns precisely with the word lilies, lilies representing death. And of course, the Neapolitan has often been connected with death. And we're at the point in the cycle where the young miller has decided to take his own life. Another facet of incorporating the repertoire is through dictation. It should be a mixture of activities, and it should widely range from pieces that are easily dictatable, such as the upper voices from a string quartet that are given, and students must notate the cello part based on the implications of the upper parts, to dictation that gets ever more texturally complicated. Let me give you an example. Say we want to have a series of chords in the key of E major that extends tonic and leads to a half cadence. Students could take that down, the outer voices. It's not very difficult with the bass that ascends. And then we could perhaps figure it in the style of Mozart. Etc. Or we could actually figure it in the style of Chopin. And of course, not only is that in the style of Chopin, it is Chopin. It's his Nocturne in E minor. Students, of course, will appreciate having real live repertoire in the class and all the time. And number 3, we need to connect music theory with performance, because if we do, we'll be able to make an explicit connection between the classroom and the music studio, the performance studio, where they learn constantly about such things as the long line. The long line in the studio class is precisely the same as melodic fluency in the music theory class. Let me give you an example. If we use Chopin yet again, his Waltz in C sharp, an underlying line is created from the high E all the way down to G sharp. The line is very accessible. We're all the way down now from the E to the A, and the line ends on G sharp with a big dissonance from which the line reascends to retain and take the opening E back. The important thing is that this falling sixth mirrors precisely the rising sixth that begins the piece. And what's interesting is most players move toward the E, putting all of their weight there, which of course is backwards. That's not at all what Chopin wrote. What Chopin wrote was that the G sharp should be much more, even though it's a weak beat, he has a crescendo on that note and immediate diminuendo, and the note is part of two voices. So we hear that sixth, which is then filled in. The idea of making this explicit to students and the performance ramifications is very important. And number 4, we need to generalize concepts. We need to simplify, and we need to choose our battles, what I like to call triage. Teach what they absolutely must know, and then once they have that, then perhaps what they should know, and only at the very end what they could know. Concepts will stick, the fewer they are. Global, overarching generalizations are, I think, very important. For example, one of the mainstays of common practice music is the idea of the sequence, a repeated harmonic pattern on different scale degrees. The most important is the circle of fifths, used from the early 1650s all the way, of course, until today. Let me give you an example in the music of Bach. And you can hear the sequence unfold clearly in the key of C minor. If we stay with the key of C minor, something I like to do so that students don't have to negotiate new sharps and flats, but pick a piece in a particular key and examples that are also in that key. So C minor is the key du jour. If we look at this example, we can of course see it 40 years later in Mozart's sonata. And can zoom ahead another 125 years and we have something like or even a little bit later in the late 60s. And you get the idea. What I'm asking in conclusion is that we make every effort to connect with our students, to worry less about getting through massive amounts of material and trying to focus on those things that are common between music between 1650 and today. The emphasis should be to place these elements in their contexts and trying to determine their functions. We can see then that it's a very finite set of principles. This is what the complete musician brings to you, musicality at the highest level. If you found this presentation useful, I recommend that you order an examination copy of the text from your OUP representative. Thank you.
The Complete Musician, 3rd edition, by Stephen Laitz, the most engaging, integrated, and musical tonal theory text available for music majors. As a leader in higher education, Oxford is committed to helping instructors find viable solutions to their common teaching challenges through forums like webinars. We hope you enjoyed today's recorded presentation and that you are able to learn some key strategies to employ in your course. Bookmark our webinar site to view a schedule of our upcoming live webinars. Browse by session and sign up right on the site. To provide feedback on today's session, please visit the following link and fill out a short survey. You will be automatically entered in a chance to win $50 in OUP books from our academic and trade division. Your feedback will allow us to refine our presentations going forward. And lastly, The Complete Musician, along with other great discipline-related texts, can be found on our website. Thanks for visiting, and we hope to be able to connect with you again soon.